Hey everyone, welcome to Tent Talk, the Farmers Market podcast. This podcast is all about farmers markets. Whether you're a farmers market manager or a small farmer, food maker, or artisan crafter selling at farmers markets, you have found just the right podcast.
I'm Kat Fields-White.
And I'm Bridget Myers. We're longtime farmers market managers, educators, and consultants. Today, we're going to chat about the basics of market startups and managing a new market.
Stay with us. That can actually be a bit of a refresher for we experienced managers. Today's episode of Tent Talk, the Farmers Market podcast, is supported by Intense, the Farmers Market Conference, bringing market managers, participants, and policymakers together again in San Diego and online on March 4th, 5th, and 6th, 2024. That is coming right up. Join us there or online for the live stream from your own home or office to learn from experienced market managers and experts on marketing, fundraising, employment law, conflict management, and so much more. There are no better ideas and solutions than those that come from the farmers market hive mind. Early pre-order pricing is in effect until the end of this month, so click the register button on the homepage at farmersmarketpros.com and reserve your ticket today.
Tick, 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 tick.
Oh
That's the
my
countdown to the
gosh.
conference.
Yes.
It's not a bomb.
No,
It's
no.
a countdown to the conference.
I'm at that stage where, every day I look at, it's one day closer, it's one day closer, and in a minute now, I'll get to that point where it's like, we only have 732 hours until the conference starts.
But then you do the countdown where it's like, this time next week, the conference will be over.
Right. Absolutely. I mean, and you do it out there. You out there that runs special events, you know that you start counting down the time to when you get to pack it up.
That's right. But it's so much fun, and we always have
Oh
such a
my
blast when it's happening. I cannot wait to see everybody.
So much fun. Putting together the schedule kind of ramped me up again, looking at all the new speakers and things. It's going to be an exciting year.
I am thrilled.
Yes.
Very excited. Well, welcome back to Tent Talk, everybody. We have been hearing a lot of questions from newer managers lately, whether they're just starting or a season or two in, and we're going to talk about the basics of startup markets today. Honestly, even though we've been managing markets for over 10 years, I've been managing for over 10 years.
Yes.
Kat's been managing
That's
over
you.
15. That's me.
I'm even longer. Coming
Yeah.
up on 16.
Woo! It's been a long, short time. Sometimes thinking about those basic questions help me evaluate what we're doing too. I feel like that's so helpful just to turn it around and go back to the basics. So you more experienced managers probably want to stay with us today.
That's right. Get a little refreshment on how the basics work. And if nothing else, you can just laugh about all the things that you had to think about way back then that you've forgotten that you had to deal with when you started. So
That's right. It can make you feel better.
We're actually excited that we're going to have one half-day block at this year's Intense Conference where we split up and have a group of sessions just for our newer managers. We try not to say baby managers, but sometimes that's how we feel when we're nurturing them along. They're the cutest. And sometimes they're just inexperienced and, not to say cute like a baby, but
Our newbies.
New
friends.
newbies. And then during that block, the more experienced folks will dig into kind of some deeper finance and policy issues that you don't actually get to dealing with until you're in the business for a little bit longer. So we can go a little bit deeper there without losing folks that are new to the farmers market industry.
Yeah, for sure. I think it's helpful to remember as an experienced market manager, someone that's been doing this for a long time, you have to always be doing those things that you do when you start out, all those kind of newbie tasks. But if you're just starting out at a market, you're probably not selling, $10,000 sponsorship packages right away and things like that. And you're not getting into deeper finance things. Maybe you're not doing food policy and all the things that we're going to split off and talk about. And just some things that I find myself doing more now that I'm kind of more experienced and my market is has a good system set up and very routine that I can kind of pay attention to those things. Whereas 10 years ago, I was not even thinking about that.
And you didn't have time, frankly.
Yeah.
Once your market's been up and running for a while, you're able to start spending time to go a little deeper on some things where, those early years are just all about getting a routine going and getting the basics covered.
Yeah. Yeah. So there's a lot of similarities, some differences, but, we're going to kind of take it back in this episode just to get real nuts and bolts and kind of start out stuff, but it's also very helpful for wherever you are in your journey.
That's right.
So what do you need to be thinking about if you're thinking about starting a market soon? If your market hasn't even emerged.
Yeah, because I feel like this time of year, there's a lot of folks that have just decided, their organization or their community group has decided there's going to be a market, or they, as an entrepreneur, have identified a place that needs a market, and so they're just getting going. So there's a lot to think about to get going on that. Farmers markets don't just happen. Part of it, one of the first things you want to look at is the budget. So somebody needs to cover the startup costs on a new market. So is that you? Is it an organization that you're affiliated with? Do you have a grant? Do you have funding from some bigger benevolent person in your area that wants to see it start? Are you a farmers market co-op? Sometimes that happens. But whoever that is, you're going to need some money. It's just like starting a farmers market business. It's not just popping up a tent. So you want to think about that. You want to set up a budget so that you've got, where the funds are going to come from to cover permits, insurance, rent on your location, if it's a location where you have to pay rent. If you're not paying rent and it's a city-based location, a lot of times there's more insurance or there's things that you have to cover there. The equipment, from street blocking barricades to your own tent and table for that info booth. And then your time and possibly staff time. Somebody's got to pay for that. Somebody's got to pay for that. Let me say it again for those in the back. We really think that farmers market managers should be pros and should be treated and valued as pros and paid for what they do. So be sure to write that into a budget. I mean, long-term, your goal is to make that market self-supporting. At least that's a goal for most markets to some degree or another. But no business is self-supporting at first. So you need to think of this as a new business, and you need to plan for how you're going to fund that.
For sure. I think a lot of folks are like, oh, this would be a great place to have a market. I'm just going to pop up a market. I mean, people call us all the time just at Farmers Market Pros and say, hey, I'm thinking about starting a market. Like, what does that entail? And, Kat does a lot of consulting with folks that want to talk about starting a market or maybe are getting started with the market. And a lot of times I think they're like, oh, I thought maybe I could just get a social media page and print some flyers and ask a few people to join me on a Sunday and just kind of pop out. And it's like, okay, well, it's
good luck with that.
Good luck. I mean, and maybe in some parts of the country, honestly, It's a lot easier than others. But I think generally it's, there's a lot more process that has to get started in any business. Even if you have a team of volunteers, who's leading that team and who's doing the organizing, who's in touch with all the vendors and farmers that are going to come to the market, what outreach is happening to the community, who's going to talk to them. So just all those kind of background things that have to happen leading up to starting your market.
Coming up on our list here. But I think the point that you're making that needs to be kept in mind is perhaps even before budget, your most basic question is, who's managing this operation? Who's going to develop a budget?
Who's in charge around here?
Yeah. So next up, you're going to figure out your location.
Yeah.
Location. You know what they say.
Yes. Location is very important. And I think based on experience, my best advice would be to think about the location long and hard before you pop in, and don't think, oh, I'll try this location out and then change to a different location if it doesn't work.
Terrible idea.
Because just that first impression is so meaningful.
It's the impression that's going to stick. People that
sticks.
come out and see a little tiny market or a market in a different area, years from now, you'll be talking to somebody and say, hey, do you go to the North Park Market? And they'll say, no, I haven't been there in a while. It's in that kind of weird parking lot. And I could never find which vendor was where. And it's like, oh, it hasn't been there for 4 years now.
Yep. Can you tell we have personal experience with this?
But those things stick. I mean, that first impression really sticks. So you want to make sure you're strong on that first day. So, I mean, there's just some nuts and bolts considerations that you need to look at to decide if a location is going to work. So do you have the linear square feet to be financially sustainable?
Yep.
And it needs to be linear. That's kind of a key term there, because people will say, oh, well, we've got, 600 square feet. Not big enough, by the way. But it's in a little box, so there's no way to put tents where you have an aisle. So you've got to think about that. Measurements are everything.
Yeah.
Are you going to be on a public space, in which case you need a different kind of permit probably? Or are you going to be on rented property? And if you're going to be on rented property because a developer or someone or an auto repair shop, we got that call a couple of weeks ago, wants to put a market on their property to kind of pump up the traffic, they may or may not be zoned for that. So you got to check. And they probably won't realize it. They're not trying to do anything funny. They just they don't realize that just because they've got one business on a site doesn't mean they're zoned to put a temporary event on a site, depending on your city.
Yeah, so definitely make sure you flush all of that out before you go through all of the hard work to get a market started and tell everybody that you're going to be open and get marketing materials out and all those things. You don't want to pop up in a spot that's really not going to work long term. And we're talking like long term. Like, don't think, okay, this person said I could try a market out for 2 months in my parking lot or, at a school site or something like that. That is not really long enough. That's not a long enough agreement for you to have with somebody's property to really like make a market work, because a market is a grocery store, right? For the most part, that's what most markets are. We're trying to be a grocery store on the street. You don't go to a grocery store for 2 months and then you're done. Or you go to a different location after that. You want to make sure you're in a reliable spot that people can count on you for years and years and years to come. So put that effort and thought in at the beginning so that you don't have to do rearranging and shifting and starting over again, in a couple months or even a year's time.
For sure. So that's one of the things that you want to look at when you're evaluating a location is what are your days and times going to be? And we have a recent episode of Tent Talk on choosing days and times.
Mm-hmm.
The one key word there is consistency. So if, for instance, you mentioned a school spot, if you're going to have a year-round market and it's going to be on a day when school is in session or isn't in session, are you always going to have access to that spot? So you want to take that into account. There's, year-round is kind of a growing trend even in cold seasons. People eat all year, they grocery shop all year, and so year-round markets are really what we're seeing more of. Storage space, try to make sure that there's somewhere on that property where you can either put a storage container or they have storage space available, or there's a business next door where you can rent a little storage space. Otherwise, you're hauling a lot of stuff every week. We get a lot of questions about, how do you solve this? Am I always going to have to load up my car and my husband's truck and haul all our stuff to the market? So, looking when you're evaluating a location, making sure there's some storage is good. And you know what? Hold out for that right location. Mm-hmm. So a lot of times people are just really excited to get going. And so they rush into something knowing that they're going to have to make a lot of compromises. And then long term, they're so sad that they did that because you've established where your market is. People have gotten to know that. Functionally, it's just really not working for you. You don't have room to grow. You can't place enough vendors to make it work financially. You don't have anywhere to put your stuff, so you're having to haul a lot of stuff in and out. Access is bad for your vendors to get in and out. You can make a place like that work, but it's not fun. So, spend the time, put off opening if you need to until you find a spot that's really going to be good for you.
Yeah, you want to make sure that, the vibe is good in the place that you're at. Like, what do the businesses around that area feel? You don't have to survey everybody and say specifically, I'm thinking about opening a market here, but just kind of poke around, see, does it look like someone's going to build on an empty lot right next to where your market space is? Because that construction usually spills out onto the sidewalk and the street, so that's going to affect your space. I mean, you have to put a lot of kind of forward thinking, put your little thinking cap on when you're out there and make sure that you're in a spot that's going to work in the long term for you. And if it's not going to work or you're not quite sure about it, I would say our advice is to not jump right in, because putting a market on is just so much work and people really get excited about it. You don't want to do something that is probably going to let people down in a couple months.
Right. Yeah. Absolutely.
Yeah.
So next step, once you've got your location, you want to jump into establishing a public presence. So you got to create a logo, create social media accounts, do at least a landing page kind of website. Make sure that includes your exact location, your times and dates. That's my pet peeve. Websites and social accounts that don't tell us where you are. Don't make people work too hard to find out where they can come hand you money. And, having those social accounts and a website, it also gives potential vendors confidence that you're going to be promoting the market, that you're going to be enduring, that you've thought things through, that you're approaching this in a professional way. So that's super important. And then before opening, you want to talk about your mission and your organizers when you're posting on social. Why are you creating this market? Who is it that's running the market? What has positioned you to succeed? Because again, that's going to give potential vendors and potential shoppers confidence that this is going to be something they can rely on.
Yeah, you want to make sure that you, with a farmer's market, are treating this as a professional business. This isn't a bake sale. This isn't an annual event that's happening once. Not that those aren't, annual events are professional things as well. But this is more, you want to be a consistent presence in your community's life. And so, being professional and coming off as reliable and someone who's really going to stick around with this business is going to help right off the bat kind of make that growth happen.
Absolutely.
Mm-hmm. So when you think about curating your market, you want to think about what's your purpose, what's your mission, what informs your mix. Lately, I've been thinking about what is the culture at my market? Like, what is this environment that I want to create? And curating the mix of vendors and farmers that I have there is what helps determine that culture. And, everyone's attitude, what they're bringing to the tables, is going to bring the community that you want to shop there at your market. So you want to make sure that you take a look at how much space you have. Like we said, make sure there's space enough to fit, vendors that you want lined up on the first day, and then also to grow, and how to balance what you're bringing in. So I know we've said this before in many a podcast, but it's very tempting as a market manager, either a brand new market manager or an experienced manager who's starting a new market, or maybe if your market is taking a little dip. I know we heard from some market managers who said, well, I'm going to pull this market back up. That's failing. It's really tempting to get applications for 10 people making jewelry, or, like a Tupperware, or like a, kind of resale vendors, things that maybe are not in line with what you want to curate at your market. And you just want booths to fill the space. And so you end up saying yes to people that really, when you go back to your mission statement and you go back to what is the culture of our market, you don't really want to, those people to stick around long term. So it's not fair to them to just say, hey, pop in here until I can fill up my spaces with people that I really do want. And it's not fair to you and your market and, the vibe of your market to have these folks in there that really is not what long term you want to have in your market. So you want to be really thoughtful about who, you're accepting to join the market and how you're going to balance all of that out.
For sure. Exclusivity of a category versus choice, giving shoppers a choice, that's always an ongoing argument. There are markets that seem to be very successful for long periods of time, having just one tomato grower or just one bakery. We find that shoppers appreciate choices. But what you want to do as you grow your market, no matter how you look at this, is sort of teeter-totter between traffic increasing and then the number of vendors or the number of duplicate vendors. You want to not overload a category so much that none of your bakers can make money. But at the same time, bakeries can have very different products, and shoppers like to have those choices. So just kind of make sure you're balancing on that. Remember, too, when you're talking, Bridget, about taking in vendors that you aren't necessarily in your mission or your criteria, but you just want to fill those spaces, the fact is, long-term, that may backfire on you, because good vendors want to be in a market with good vendors, and farmers oftentimes want to be in a market that's focused on farmers and not on non-food, or certainly not on resale or commodity kind of products. So you've got to be careful when you're kind of loosening up your standards to just fill a booth, that you're not losing the chance to ever attract to the vendor. He might be committed at another market this season, but interested in joining you next season. If you've meanwhile filled up your market with people that they don't feel is a good fit, that isn't going to attract the same kind of demographic that they want, you may never get those folks in.
Yep, absolutely. And we've heard that feedback from vendors. I know I have found myself in that position where I'm just like, oh, I need to fill this last spot. Really tempting to just pop this person in that's been begging to get in, but just is just not aligned with how I curate my markets. It's not that they're a good vendor or bad vendor. It's just not in line with what I want to host at the market and what all the other folks that are there to do. And so it's really tempting. So as a brand new market manager, I can, just assume and kind of think way back to when I was. It's just real tempting. And, I think advice is just to stay strong and just have a smaller market. I mean, having a small market that's full of really great vendors is fantastic.
Absolutely.
You don't have to have a huge market to have a huge market doesn't equal a good market. It's just the quality of the farmers and vendors are there. And keep that in mind. Even if you have a small number of farmers and vendors, if they are all offering something wonderful and they have, integrity of practices and they're bringing a great product to your market, then that's great.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah.
Big enough business. So when you're recruiting vendors, you want to recruit vendors that'll stay, because obviously the goal is to keep increasing the offerings and not necessarily be a giant market, but have a nice balance of things. So there's some things to keep in mind when you're recruiting vendors, how to get to them. You want to know what your rules and your criteria and your fees are going to be in advance, because they're going to ask. Mm-hmm. So you want to be able to extend that information when they inquire with you. And then you want to make social media announcements on those platforms that you've already established. You can go to your local extension services that help with agricultural businesses to help find farmers. A lot of times they know about, especially new small farmers that are just starting out, that might love to get into a new market.
That's a great idea, because recruiting is hard sometimes. And so finding other people that are involved with folks that you want at your market and just they'd probably be like overjoyed to connect people that they're working with you and with an opportunity for them.
That's right. People forget about that so often, and the
Mhm.
extension folks really do like to make those connections and help the farmers. If
Yeah.
there are commercial kitchens, like rental kitchens in your area, that's a great place to find food makers that are
Mhm.
just getting started, and maybe they're doing a little bit of catering, or they're selling at some little community pop-up shop or something like that, and they would love to have a consistent market to operate in. So reaching out to commercial kitchen operators is a great way to find new food vendors.
Definitely. And we've had some kitchen operators like contact us over the years, and it's been so great because they'll say, hey, this person's making this really great product. I think you'd love to check it out. Can you maybe connect with them and help them through the application process or whatever? Maybe have them come test it out. And it's just a really nice, like, we're all in the same boat here, and it's just nice to connect with folks that are in that same world with you because they're going to see your vendors just like you're going to see your vendors. So kind of making those connections are important.
Yeah, you want to make sure that you've printed flyers or business cards. We use kind of a bookmark style.
Mm-hmm.
It's like a mini brochure that says where the markets are, what time they are. You could print one of those, too, that's specifically for attracting vendors. That's good to hand to vendors and say, this is where the market is. This is what kind of traffic we're expecting to get. These are maybe some of the other vendors that are in there. Again, good vendors attract good vendors.
Mm-hmm.
So have something to give to those commercial kitchens or the extension agents to sort of share with the folks that they're dealing with. And then you can also use those when you go to visit other markets. And we've had a couple of episodes where we talk about the etiquette of doing that.
Mm-hmm.
You probably don't want to go to a Saturday market to recruit for a new Saturday market. It's just not done. It is done all the time.
It is done, but don't do it.
But don't do it.
It's rude.
Yeah. But certainly going to a Thursday market to talk about a Friday market, or, we go out and talk to people on Wednesdays and say, hey, do you have a Sunday market? Because our Sunday market is newer and we're building that. So certainly that's a good way to do it. And the first vendors you sign up, if you love them to pieces, have them talk to other vendors. Vendors like to have people that they know around them. When we first started what's currently our big market 15 years ago, the key was convincing a couple of great farmers and a couple of great vendors that they wanted to be there. And then they really did a lot of the work of saying, hey, have you heard about this new market? Come on with me. It'll be fun. We'll get the gang back together on Saturdays. And we really attracted a lot of vendors that way.
Yeah, but you need to be creating a good environment that's professional and that is, fun for them to be at, and also where there's business. So you have to do your part on that side. But yeah, still today, I get a lot of vendors that are like, oh, my friend is, the sauce guy at your Saturday market, or, my girlfriend makes jewelry and she's on Wednesday. Like, I do this, want to check it out. And so it's just nice to have that referral. And really, it feels great as a market manager that one of my vendors is kind of referring another vendor to join in, because then I'm like, oh, okay, they really like it here.
Right.
They like me. They really like me.
They do. They like the way you operate. They
Yeah.
like the amount of business that they can do at the market. So yeah, that's a fun way to get a referral for sure. Then you got to create a map.
Then you got to create a map. And we've had lots of map chatter, I think, lately. I've just been talking to other market managers and kind of talking with my staff about making maps and the procedure for making maps and how people don't recognize it's such a complex little Tetris puzzle. So thinking about that ahead of time and how you're going to do your map, what system you're going to use. Just start off on the right foot.
For sure. There's the big picture that you want to take into account when you start with the whole idea of mapping is, how do people shop?
Yeah.
In America, we're used to shopping in grocery stores that have aisles with products on both sides. So ideally, you're going to have that kind of setup. Now, I will say that much to my skepticism, I actually agreed to take on a site about a year and a half ago. It's our newest market, where the street that we are on is not wide enough to put booths on both sides. There's only booths on one side. That's counterintuitive to how people travel when they shop, because they like to go up one side, cross over, come back down the other side to look at the other vendors on that side. And I was really worried about it. Who knew? I do have a park on the other side where there are not vendors. And so it's a beautiful thing for the vendors to look at. It's a beautiful walk to make, so people don't seem to mind walking up to one end shopping and walking back. And sometimes they notice somebody who was too busy on their way up and they pick them up on the way back, and it works okay. But the aisle situation is typically kind of the best way to put things together to generate more sales. That being said, I've seen the donut setup where you got a big hole in the middle and you have vendors in a circle. I've seen there's a hugely successful market that we always go to in Portland, Oregon, that seems to just wend serpentine-like through. They have some very, very clever mapping going on there, but if you glance at it and you didn't know what you're looking at, it looks like there's just booths everywhere in this beautiful park.
It is very like a little overwhelming when I get there because I'm like, where's the system? Where's the path? Where's the aisle? But somehow I make my way around that whole market. And it's just like once you're in it, there's a rhythm to where you walk and what you see. And I don't feel like I ever miss any vendors when I'm at that market.
No, they seem to have little blocks of areas that do have aisles, but they're in clumps. And then there's some trees and beautiful benches and
it's just
music and
gorgeous.
Yeah.
Gorgeous. I'm envious of that market like landscape. But yeah.
But however you lay it out, think as a customer. Think about what's going to be my experience as I walk past this booth. And are you used to seeing produce next to stationery in a grocery store? Not so much. So you maybe want to arrange your vendors so that things that are like one another are close to each other. So just think about shopping patterns, and you really want to map to serve your customers. And honestly, here's a pro tip. You want to make your map to serve your customers first and then your vendors, not your vendors first. You don't want to map just to make sure that friends are next to each other. You don't want to map just to be sure that nobody's in the sun, which is always the request. And, we're working outside. There's going to be sun somewhere. You really want to create the map that's going to create the best shopping experience. That will help the vendors, even though they don't seem to be necessarily your top of mind who you're aiming for, and that may frustrate them. So sometimes it's good to explain to them, hey, we're doing this because this layout will improve your sales.
Yeah, we've had a lot of conversations with our vendors that are like, I want to be on the ends because I pack up quickly and I can leave early. And it's like, well, that's not something that's serving the entire market. So I'm going to do the thing that's serving the whole market and put this person on the end, because they have a full, beautiful display. And, so just those little things. But it's really easy to say, you don't know what you're talking about. Why would I do that? But really, as a new market manager and as a reminder for us more wise market managers that have been doing this for a long time, vendors aren't thinking about that kind of stuff a lot of the time, just like we're not thinking about a lot of things that pertain to their business. So just doing a little explanation and saying, this is why I have this person on the corner. They have tables piled high with beautiful bright oranges, and they have avocados, and they have fresh juice. Like, that's who I want in the corner. And like, can you understand that? And like, although your product and your display is wonderful, it's kind of minimal and it doesn't draw everybody in the way that this other vendor does. And typically they'll say, okay, yes, that makes sense. I can have a little patience at the end of the day and I'll get out of here. It's not a big deal. So using kind of, having a conversation with vendors as you set up the map, making sure that you have a map. I know some markets are like first come, first serve, or like pop up wherever. And I would like to talk to a market manager who does that not because I don't think it could work, because obviously it just works for a lot of people, but I don't understand like how that works and the system of that. Weren't we just somewhere where they were saying whoever gets here earliest?
Yeah.
Were we at Pike Place?
We were at Pike Place, and they told us that a while back. And it was, they said, people were lined up, vendors were lined up to write their initials or their company name on this giant map on the wall of where they wanted to be that day.
Oh,
and they just popped it on there. And we said, wow, that's interesting. We've always pre-mapped the markets. We know what vendor would be good next to another vendor. And, and they're like, well, no, this is the only way it would work. Well, no, it's not the only way it would work. And I'm curious about how that one works. And I'm obviously huge, big standing market. It works well. They're busy. But we like to kind of analyze what we think from a shopper's point of view would be a logical layout and go with that.
Yeah. So and I usually tell other market managers, the only thing you can do is make a map. That's the only way to work.
You have to have a map.
Have to have a map.
For sure.
So we are all kind of set in our ways. But from experience, I feel like having people like the bread next to the dipping oil guy, or the pasta vendor next to the pasta sauce vendor, and the mozzarella cheese vendor across the aisle from the tomato farmer. And just those kind of things really, really do make a huge difference. And it impacts sales numbers for your vendors and farmers, which is the whole point, right? You can't have a market unless your farmers and vendors are making sales. So you have to really think about that. What's going to like increase sales for these folks? And it is really having a market map that makes sense most of the time. So that's what I would do. Just right off the bat, if you're starting out, try to think that. And definitely have some reason behind why you're making your map. Don't just put your friends together, Don't just put the vendors that you like closer to your info booth or something like that. You need to think about sales first as well.
Absolutely.
And how people shop.
Yep. There's a whole psychology of sales thing on how far people will walk before they subconsciously have to make a decision as to whether or not they'll keep walking.
Mm-hmm.
So putting in big gaps between vendors in order to make your market look bigger, honestly, that's counterproductive. It's going to reduce sales. So there's a lot of little things to think about. Creating the map that somebody can follow. There's a bunch of ways to do that. We're embarrassed to say how we do it, but there's actually some wonderful platforms now that will let you build your map digitally, like in the program. Then you can print it, or you can embed it on your website, or you can post it so that both your vendors and your customers know how to find where somebody's supposed to be. Yeah. And I know vendors love that kind of visual direction before they get there. One tiny thing that I will say is that we've oftentimes resisted putting out a map because we don't want our shoppers to beeline towards the one vendor that they know. We find that if they have to meander around and look for them, sometimes they discover products they didn't even know they needed.
Yes, that's usually what I'll say to folks that are like, where's the map? Like, where can I find a map? I go, I can tell you where to find somebody. It's in my brain. And also, I would like you to walk all 6 blocks of this market because then you can find and discover new vendors because they won't see them if they're just going straight to their favorite people. So
yeah, ups and downs.
But also, they're like, I have a 30-minute parking spot. Please,
right,
for the love of God, tell me where my people are that I need to find. So I understand both point of views, but think about, what's the community that's coming to your market? Are they coming to hang out? Do they have time to meander around? Is it a business market where they need to get in and out? They're just straight business. So think about, who's coming to your market and decide what you want to keep up on. I mean, keeping up a map that's public facing, I've never done it, but it sounds like a lot of work. But
we kind of did it during COVID.
Yeah.
Remember, we used to break down not precisely where they'd be, but at least the block that they would be in. We would publish that before each market. And honestly, I just saw a meme and a long discussion. It was really art vendors that were all at mostly a non-food pop-up kind of market, but some of them were really cranky about the fact that they couldn't see a map or get their specific booth number until the day before. And, were making a lot of fun of the event manager that would say, on Friday, hey, I'm still making the map before the Saturday event. But, you also have vendors change and you need to move people around, or somebody all of a sudden plops a bulldozer from a local construction site into a couple of your booths and, things change. But we get it. People love maps. You need a map. Figure out a way to make a map, whether you use a platform or you're doing it on a Google spreadsheet or however you're doing it. I think we're all now past the point that I was at 15 years ago where we used to physically draw a map and then pencil in the vendors and erase them for the next week's map and start over. So I guess somebody's still doing that.
I'm sure somebody is. And it's probably working for them.
That's
it's fine. Short story of when I first started working at the markets. I was living in Arizona and I came over here to run Kat's Market while she jaunted off to Paris for the first time ever. And she gave me her little pencil maps with the little pencil drawings on there. And guess what? It poured rain. And that map was rendered useless in about 10 minutes. And then the vendors had to tell me where they went. And God knows if they told me the right place or they were like, oh, Bridget's here. I can just tell her the best spot that I want to go to. Substitute teacher time.
I don't think I've ever heard this story.
Yes.
Sorry.
Oh, man. Remember it poured every day that you were gone? And then you got back in town. I went back home and it was bright, beautiful, sunny San Diego weather. So
I didn't really do that on purpose, but I do think it convinced the vendors that I had magical powers to keep the rain away.
That's right.
They've relied on that ever since. Call Kat, make it stop raining.
That was a trial by fire for me. Thank you very much.
Anyway, back to your basic setup instructions and starting a new market. Plan to have a map.
Plan to have a map. It's very important.
Take these things into consideration.
And some vendor feedback that I kind of knew and got recently is that I always feel weird if we have to loop a driveway or if the street is really narrow and so the aisle's a little bit tight. I never knew, do the vendors like this? Do they like a huge aisle? Do they want more space? But we had to move our whole market to a different street back in August. And I talked to a couple vendors when we were up there and they were like, oh, we love this street because the aisle was pushed together tighter. And so the shoppers had to be closer to them. And
it took me a while to figure that out too. Yeah. But I remember a few years ago talking to enough vendors that would say, I don't want to be on this street with a huge wide aisle. I want them to have to walk closer to my booth. So
yeah, because then they can see your product better and you can... We don't like carnival callers, but you can say, hi, do you want to try my hot sauce? And they can hear you because the aisle isn't as wide. So if you're in a tight space, don't feel bad about making the aisle pretty tight because for vendors, I think that's beneficial to them a lot of times.
Yeah. Obviously, you have to make it, wide enough to be accessible and,
and
all those things. But
let wheelchairs and strollers and, folks be able to walk through comfortably.
Right. But it doesn't need to be 30 feet wide.
Exactly.
No matter how busy your market is, they like to have the folks a little bit closer to the booths.
Yep.
Let's see. Let's hit one more basic that you got to think about.
Okay.
And it's a question that I've seen I've seen a bunch of questions lately about how do I deal with vendors that pay late, but let's back it up before we get to that. There's a few ways to invoice for your space fees.
Mm-hmm.
Hopefully you know already that you need to charge for the space fee. It's interesting to me sometimes. We'll get applicants and occasionally a market manager that says, so do people pay to be here? It's like, well, yeah. Because I need to get paid to be here.
Look at my staff. They all get paychecks. So
yeah,
that barricade is so expensive.
Right.
And
even if you're using volunteers, like from a community organization or something, if you want to be able to pay for marketing, for instance, or to pay somebody to do really good marketing that'll increase people's sales, you need to be charging space rent.
Something.
And that's... I mean, it's expected. We do get vendors that email and say, does it cost anything to be there? And I'm always surprised. But most vendors who apply and most vendors who attend are aware that there's a charge to be in that booth.
Yeah. And it depends. I mean, what is the going rate in your area? So you need to figure that out.
Right. You want to establish fees that are competitive with the other markets and events in your area. You can't go crazy, more expensive than other people and expect them to come. You don't want to set your booth fees too low, partly because you won't have enough money to do adequate marketing, but partly because that also makes you look weird. So when you're setting the price of a product or something like space rent, if you're crazy less than everybody else is, then people start to question your value. Oh, well, maybe this space is only worth $5 instead of the $35 that the market across the street's charging.
Yeah.
So,
I think vendors say, oh, it's only $5. Does that mean I'm only going to make $200 at this market as opposed to the market that charges $35 a space where I'm going to have $800 in sales? So I know that they start doing that math in their head. So really make sure you know the value of your spaces and don't be afraid to charge it. And some vendors are going to say, oh, I can't believe it. That's way too much. How could you charge that much? And just, that's okay. Vendors will find a place to go. They'll find a market for them. But figure out a price that works and really stick to it and then work hard to make that the true value of the space. Mm-hmm.
Some folks charge a percentage rent. We don't do that. Many of the markets in our geographic area do charge a percentage. I don't know of anybody anymore that's only charging a percentage. There's usually a base rent that this is what you pay no matter what. And then if your sales exceed X, then you pay Y. Or you pay a percentage of those sales on top of that base rent. But that also affects how you invoice. So old school, everybody used to collect cash on site. I mean, that's how things happened when I started. And as I've traveled around the world, I find that's how things happen in many areas. I'm talking to people across the pond in England and I'm saying, how do you collect rent at this market? And she says, oh, we walk around with these little slips of paper and we collect cash. That was a few years back. That doesn't happen much anymore, but there are still people doing that. And often if you're collecting on site, whether it's a check or cash or you've got a square on you, folks that charge a percentage of sales will oftentimes collect that rent at the end of the market. Folks that don't charge a percentage of sales oftentimes will walk around to the booths and collect that rent at any time. Once the market is set up and before it gets really busy, that's a good time to catch people and get that taken care of in advance rather than at the end where you're trying to break down equipment and things too. If you're billing online, consistency is really important. We send out invoices now online, and when we've changed the day of the week that we sent out that invoice, it confuses people and they miss their invoices. So a lot of folks, they get used to knowing to check their email on Wednesday because there's going to be an invoice for that Saturday or Sunday market. And so it doesn't matter how far in advance you bill, but do it with some consistency so that you help your farmers and vendors know when to look for that invoice and when to get it paid.
Yeah, I think they're just busy. And so you just need to really spell it out really clearly to them and let them know. And you need to be consistent if you want them to pay consistently. Just think about, you got to start it. You got to set the example for that.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And then we've had a lot of questions in our community group lately, our online community, about how to deal with late payments.
Yeah.
And all kinds of answers from different market managers too. Some that are like, oh, well, if they're, in a bind, I'll set up a payment schedule. Lots of managers that say, hey, this is what the rent is and we need it to operate. And if they don't pay, they don't get to participate that week. So we had, managers that are billing at a certain time of the week. If it's not paid by X number of hours before market setup, they're just out. That makes it tricky for you. You've got to redo your map and all that as well. We've got market managers now with online billing that make everybody put a credit card or a bank connection on file with them. And so then if the vendor hasn't paid by 2 days before the market, they just get charged automatically. So if they're too busy to remember to deal with that bookkeeping function, the fee still gets paid. And then there's some folks that do late charges. That can be helpful, but it also sort of implies that, hey, if you want to pay later, you just pay a little bit more. I find that vendors can kind of get in a hole on that. It's not really helping them. It's sort of the payday loan approach to dealing with space fees.
Yes. I think it's kind of tricky. I think even at our big market, I'd say 93% of our vendors just pay very regularly. A lot of them are set up on auto pay. So as soon as the invoice hits their books, it just gets paid, which is great. Or they pay the month at a time as opposed to the week. We have a lot of folks that just pay the whole month and just get it over with, and they don't have to worry about a weekly invoice. So we have a couple different tiers. But then there's a little handful of vendors that are like, I'm always having to hound them. I just had like some talks with people last week too, because I was like, hey, we're starting a new year. Like, let's start some new habits. And so just having those like kind of one-on-one conversations with any vendors that are really giving you a hard time. And I haven't had a lot of pushback, but I can see how if I was a new market manager coming into or taking over a market or starting a new market from scratch or just not as experienced, or honestly, I mean, the markets that I manage are two like really established busy markets. And so those I'm like, look, I have a line out the door, people coming into this market. I don't say that to them because it's not, I don't want to, be arrogant like that with them. But I think they know that their space is kind of coveted. So they need to play by the rules or else they're not going to be at that market and someone else is waiting to get in. So, but I definitely have run like smaller and newer markets where that's not the case. And so I find myself really wanting those vendors to come in and giving them a lot more grace and leeway on paying late or having to chase them a lot harder. So it just depends, which is understandable. I mean, that's a position that you find yourself in if you're in a market like that. So it's not good or bad. It's just that's what happens. So being consistent, explaining why you need the rent when you need it, maybe doing a little explanation of your costs and say, hey, like this market costs something to run. The vendors paying us is how we run this market. That's how we operate our business. I wouldn't take a bag of oranges from you and say, hey, I'm going to pay you in like 2 weeks. Is that cool? So it's like...
Or worse, take the bag of oranges and then walk away. And they say, whoa, what's happening? And they're like, I'm going to pay you in 2 weeks.
Yeah, not even explain. Yes. And just kind of like you're selling something like the customers buying their oranges are their clients. Our vendors are our clients. And so kind of explaining that to folks, because sometimes I don't think farmers and vendors are really trying to like scam you out of the rent. They just are being absent-minded about it. And so having a little conversation with them, it takes time. But just being really consistent. And I would say my biggest thing is don't let someone go a long time without paying. Don't let them get like 2 or 3 weeks behind because it's real hard to catch that up. And if you keep doing that consistently and they're always 2 or 3 weeks behind, they're never going to not be 2 or 3 weeks behind. So you have to kind of put your foot down. We've had to suspend vendors a couple times and just say, hey, you're 2 weeks behind on this rent. You don't have a space this weekend at the market until you get caught up. And then if you get caught up and you prepay for your space the following week, then you can come back to the market.
Yeah, you really do. And you're right. When you've got a brand new market and you have a tendency to kind of let that go because you just want those folks to come back. But in the long run, remember the brand new market is going to turn into an older market. And so the habits that you establish now are going to stay with you for a long time.
And your reputation as a market manager will spread faster than you can believe because vendors talk, which is great. I mean, it's a good thing that they talk because they'll tell people that your market's great and then they join. They'll also say, hey, this market manager isn't real great about collecting rent. Go over there and, join this market. Or they just kind of chit chat in their booths and they'll talk about you. So make sure that you are just taking a kind of a firm stance, expecting professionalism from them. I'm usually like, hey, I'm a professional. You're a professional. We're both running businesses. We need to be fair. We need to treat each other fairly with this,
And I think sometimes, we're in the situation where we're dealing with these very small businesses, and especially if you're dealing with very new businesses, you want to nurture them. And so you want to kind of help them along. But honestly, you're not helping them if you're letting them get into debt on their rent. And if they're consistently having a hard time coming up with the rent, there's something else more basic that's wrong with their business that you would help them to point that out and make them look at. Do you have your product priced correctly? Have you not done the work to establish what your true cost is, and are you losing money every time you sell a jar of that jam? So you want to, maybe your display needs to help. If somebody can't pay their rent, they're struggling in ways that it would behoove them and you for you to help them kind of figure out what that problem is. And maybe their business just isn't designed to be profitable or to cover its costs. And you're not doing them a favor by dragging out their recognition of that. It's painful to get yourself in debt on a very small business, and it's hard to dig out. And so you want to help them come to that realization and think about what kind of changes they can make sooner rather than later.
Yeah, the longer you drag it out, the longer they're not only getting in debt with you owing you rent, but if they're showing up with product, they're maybe paying for product ingredients and jars and staff that they really can't pay for. If they
putting things on credit cards and things that they're going to have a hard time getting on top of again.
Yeah, and one day they're not going to have the money to put gas in their tank to drive to the market, and it's going to kind of implode. So before you get to that point, these are brand new businesses, and you know what? Stuff happens. And as a market manager, you kind of have to be that. I mean, I kind of think like motherly about the vendors, even though, we've talked about this before. It's a complicated relationship. Are we their landlord? Are we their mom? Are we their friend? But I kind of take what would I do if my child was like struggling like this and I knew that they were struggling? Would I drag them along? No, I would say, let's stop. Let's recollect. I've had to have some conversations with vendors and say, hey, do you need to take a break for a couple weeks? Just try a break. Sit down, figure out your finances, crunch some numbers, and then get back to me and say, is this a viable place for you to be? And you know what? Even if I love their product so much and I am going to be crushed if they don't come back to my market, if it's better for them and their business, that's just better overall. Because you don't want someone that's desperately failing at your market. That's not what farmers markets are for, So think about that kind of long-term situation with them and where you want to be with your vendors.
What we want to do is boost people up.
That's right. We're pros, right?
We're pros, and we want to turn people into pros.
Yeah.
To wrap up, rules on invoicing and fee collection lead to the larger picture, which is rules in general. You want to establish your market policies about attendance and about on-time arrival and staying open till the market closes and where you park your car and all those things right up front. Communication is key, whether you're just starting a market or whether you've got a market that you've had forever, but especially when you're starting a market, you're setting the tone, you're creating the habits. Make sure you've got your rules worked out and be consistent about them, no matter what they are. They apply to everybody the same way. The penalties are the same way if you violate them. So that is probably one of your biggest tools in your arsenal.
That's right. And if you start out consistent and you are really passionate about this and you have a positive attitude and you find a space that works and there's folks in your community that want a farmer's market and want to shop there, more farmers markets is just, better for everyone in the community, in the world. So get out there and get those markets started. It's definitely impossible to tell you everything you need to know in an hour-long podcast, although I know people call us and wish that they could just listen to us for an hour and they would just be ready to go. So definitely take advantage of educational resources out there. I know we do. We're always furthering our education, and there's lots of stuff for new market managers as well. You want to binge Tent Talk for sure. There are 270 episodes, and a lot of them have helpful information for startups. Scroll back and find those episodes where we talk about everything about starting the market. Come to Intense, the Farmers Market Conference, of course. We won't call you a baby manager when you come. The information you'll get from presenters is super valuable, and talking to fellow market managers is absolutely priceless. And we have some other educational resources for managers that we'll be announcing later this month, so definitely stay tuned for that. As the hashtag says, farmers markets don't just happen, and they are worth every bit of the work.
Thanks for listening today, and thank you to everyone who attends Intense, the Farmers Market Conference, for supporting all the work we do at Farmers Market Pros to support farmers, vendors, and markets. Your conference registrations and online class and consulting purchases support production of the free content that we provide every week, year-round on Tent Talk and in our private Facebook community. The 8th annual Intense, the Multinational Farmers Market Conference, is coming up before we know it in San Diego and online March 4th, 5th, and 6th, 2024. Reserve your place now to take advantage of early pre-order pricing by clicking the Register button on the homepage at farmersmarketpros.com.
Thanks for listening to Tent Talk today. Please leave us a review on your podcast app or wherever you listen to Tent Talk. Let us and others know how you're enjoying the podcast. Be sure to subscribe so you don't miss the next episode of Tent Talk. Connect with fellow farmers market folks in our private Facebook group, the Farmers Market Pros community. Follow us on Instagram at Farmers Market Pros. and find online education and other resources on our website at farmersmarketpros.com. Tent Talk is brought to you by Farmers Market Pros, where passion meets profit. Tent Talk is produced by Leandra Hayes with original music by David Mead. Tune in next week for another great episode.